Today, we're going to dive deep into one of the most powerful and honestly most misunderstood tools in all of human interaction: strategic silence. And I want you to forget everything you think you know about silence being passive or weak. We're going to treat it for what it truly is: a psychological force that can completely flip the power dynamic in pretty much any room you walk into. Let's just kick things off with this quote, because it hits hard. You think you're being nice, being clear, when you explain yourself over and over. But what's really going on under the surface? It's this unconscious plea for approval. The message here is huge. The second you stop justifying yourself is the second you stop being a child asking for permission and start becoming the master of your own world. So we're going to frame this need to explain as a kind of psychological sickness. Now hold on, this isn't about attacking niceness. It's about showing how a certain kind of niceness, the kind that's always looking over its shoulder for a nod of approval, actually builds a prison around you, brick by brick. I want you to really think about this for a second. That feeling, that frustrating, empty pit in your stomach when you've laid out your case perfectly, you've justified every single choice, and yet you feel weaker, smaller than when the conversation started. That feeling, that's a direct symptom of what we're about to unpack. Okay, let's put these two side by side. It's all about perception versus reality. On the left, you've got over-explaining. Yeah, it feels polite, like you're doing the right thing, but look at the result. You're just handing over control. Now look at the right, silence. It might feel weird at first, maybe even rude, but what does it do? It commands respect, and, this is the key, it makes you unpredictable. All right, let's get to the diagnosis. We're calling it the power leak. Just picture it. Every single time you get that urge to justify why you did something or why you feel a certain way, you are literally, unconsciously, draining your own power, your own authority. It's a slow leak, but it adds up. To really get this leak, we need to borrow a brilliant concept from the psychologist Carl Jung: psychic energy. The best way to think about it is like a fuel tank for your mind. It is not infinite. And every time you have an impulsive reaction, every time you jump to explain yourself when you don't need to, that's you drilling another hole in your own gas tank. And this quote from Jung just nails it. Reacting, defending, explaining, it binds you. It ties you to the other person's reality. You end up playing their game by their rules. So if you constantly feel emotionally exhausted, it's probably not because you're weak. It's because all your incredible energy is being misdirected into pointless reactions instead of powerful actions. So what is this all, really? When you boil it down, this habit of over-explaining, it's a form of self-abandonment. That's a strong term, but it's true. You are taking your own truth, your own gut feeling, and you're sanding it down, watering it down just so somebody else will find it acceptable. That's not communication, my friend. That is submission. And this slide really puts it into sharp focus. On one side, you have true communication. You state your position. It comes from a place of solid internal authority. It doesn't need anyone else's stamp of approval. But on the other side, you're basically begging. You're justifying your position, which is just a fancy way of asking, is this okay? Am I okay? And that's the power leak in action. The philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche had a pretty brutal name for this whole mindset. He called it slave morality. He saw it as this sneaky value system that the weak created to survive, one that praises being harmless and agreeable above all else. It's this invisible code that tricks you into feeling good about making yourself smaller. Okay, so we've got the diagnosis. What in the world is the treatment? We're calling it the mirror of silence. This is where things get really interesting. This is the actual technique for taking ambiguity, that state of being unreadable, and turning it into your greatest weapon. First things first, we have to completely change how we think about silence. It is not empty space. It's not passive. When you use it right, it's an active, overwhelming presence. It creates this psychological vacuum in the conversation that the other person becomes desperate to fill, and it completely destabilizes their sense of control. So, how does this mirror actually work? Well, it's a 4-step process, and it's pretty wild. Step 1, you just withhold your reaction. You refuse to get sucked into their story. Step 2, this creates that vacuum, and you can almost feel the social pressure building. Step 3, this is where it gets good. They are forced to project. They will rush to fill that silence with their own baggage, their own insecurities, their own fears. And finally, step 4, your silence becomes a mirror, forcing them to look at their own internal chaos. And why is this so incredibly effective? Because as Nietzsche knew, human beings are pattern-seeking animals. When you become unpredictable, you completely short-circuit their brain. They can't control the narrative anymore because they can't figure you out. The entire logic of the conversation flips. You're no longer the one reacting, you've become the center of gravity. So this treatment, the mirror of silence, it leads to the ultimate cure, becoming psychologically sovereign. This is the end game. This is the big shift from being a slave to your circumstances to becoming the absolute master of your own reality. And this right here shows you just how deep that internal shift goes. The reactive self is trapped, needing everyone to get them, which makes them totally predictable. They're basically begging for permission to exist. But the sovereign self, they operate from their own internal compass. They couldn't care less if they're misunderstood. They don't ask for space, they just take. Now, the engine that drives this entire transformation is what Nietzsche called the will to power, and we have got to get this right. This has nothing to do with dominating other people. It's all about self-mastery. It's that relentless internal drive to grow, to get stronger, to overcome your own weaknesses and become the most capable version of yourself you can possibly be. And this quote is, well, it's the mic drop. This is the ultimate expression of that sovereign mind. Real power, real victory, isn't about shouting the loudest or having the last word. It's when you don't even feel the need to enter the fight in the first place. That's when you know you've already won. What this all means is you literally flip the script of your own life. You stop being this passive object that's just shaped and molded by external forces, and you become the subject, the creator, who actively shapes their reality from a place of inner strength. So the big question, where do you even begin with all this? Your first real act of power is actually something very simple, but incredibly hard. You have to embrace the courage to be misunderstood. That's it. That's the first step on this entire path. Let's just be brutally honest with ourselves for a moment. How many times have you bitten your tongue, nodded along with a story you knew was false, or just quieted that voice in your gut, all to keep a fragile peace, all just to be seen as the nice one? Well, that false peace has a massive price tag. Just look at this list. You are leaking that precious psychic energy. You are submitting your own truth. You are losing your internal authority. You literally become a side character in someone else's story. And at the end of the day, it's just a constant, slow burn betrayal of yourself. To put it as starkly as possible, Nietzsche would argue that living in this state of self-abandonment isn't just a bad habit. It's an offense against your own potential. It's a fundamental betrayal of the powerful person you are meant to become. So ultimately, it really just boils down to this. Every single day, in dozens of tiny moments, you face a choice. Will you choose the silence of weakness, which is really just submission with a different name, the silence that begs for approval? Or will you choose the silence of the strong, the strategic, powerful silence we've been talking about, the silence that commands respect? The choice is always yours.